Now, Department of Revenue has a different phrase for its intrastate UCR, and it's called the Georgia Intrastate Motor Carrier Registration System. You may question why we're seeking to acquire this program. The reasons are straightforward. First, by law, the fees generated from the UCR program must be spent in a certain amount of ways on motor carrier programs, on motor carrier safety programs, and the administration of the aforementioned programs, the motor carrier safety and motor carrier programs for Georgia. We're already at DPS responsible for 2 of these programs, and all we're asking for is to administer what we are already enforcing and implementing. It makes good management sense for us to do this, to accept full responsibility for the administration of those programs that we're already responsible for, those programs that we created, implemented, and that we enforce on the roadside and at various inspection stations throughout the state. We believe at DPS that we can cut the administrative costs associated with the administration of the program substantially, and we have some white paper on that. We believe we can cut it from 36 to 40% administrative cost to approximately 10%. These savings in administrative costs will provide us with the ability to hire, our goal is to hire an additional 21 law enforcement officers, most of which, if not all, will be assigned to the I-95, I-16 corridor around Savannah. And as most of you know, the port expansion project and harbor deepening project will cause about, I think the projected number I heard was about 40% increase in traffic in the area. We want to match that with law enforcement presence. This force multiplier in the Savannah area will provide greater homeland security. It will provide increased highway safety due to increased law enforcement efforts. In other words, we'll have more truck inspectors to inspect more trucks and place more unsafe drivers and unsafe vehicles out of service. The next thing is greater protection to our state's highway infrastructure, the roads and bridges. We can weigh more trucks, we can write more weight citation, hopefully cutting down on the overweight trucks in the area. We at DPS see nothing but a win-win situation to our proposal to assume the UCR program. To further illustrate this point, DPS already possesses a wealth of experience in the administration and implementation of several federal and state commercial vehicle regulatory and safety programs. And the administration and continued implementation of the UCR program will go hand in glove with the programs we already administer. For example, the Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program, which is a commercial vehicle safety federal grant program in which the Georgia DPS is named as the lead agency by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration for the administration and implementation of the motor carrier and motor carrier safety and enforcement programs for Georgia. The regulation and implementation of programs associated with the for hire, household good movers, passenger carriers, limousine carriers, and non-consensual tow operations that operate inside the boundaries of Georgia. And these were the laws that we administered that came over last year during House Bill 865 from the Public Service Commission. We also implement and enforce the state's maximum size and weight laws on both interstate and state route systems. We do this in an effort to protect the state's highway infrastructure and save the citizens money. We have the desire and the program experience to do a good job with this program. That's all I have. Any questions?
Thank you, Captain. Do we have any of the committee members have a question for Captain Jones? Well, very good. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Captain Jones. He pretty much made my case for me as he takes my notes off, too. But that's okay. That's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, to me, this is a win-win situation. It's the sort of situation where right now we're paying anywhere from 38 to 40% in administrative costs. We can cut that down to 10%. We can have more people out there patrolling, doing the Homeland Security thing with the ports and things of that nature, as well as the fact that we'd be doing an education program, educating people, as well also putting more people to work doing this. One of the things I think is a side benefit of this is that all of us are talking about transparency and the money being where it needs to be. And quite frankly, what this does is public safety is already doing 2 out of the 3 things, and what it does is it aligns it up and puts the money, puts the control of this back under public safety where it probably should be to start with. And I would entertain any questions, but I would ask for your favorable response to this bill.
Thank you. If you will stand, you've got some questions. Representative Hawkins.
Representative Rogers, thank you for this proposed legislation. I also appreciate the briefing. It was very cogent, and I understand what you're trying to do. My only question is, what's the position of the Department of Revenue on this shift?
I have not seen any negative feedback or any questions whatsoever about the Department of Revenue. It's my understanding that the Public Safety Commissioner and the Commissioner of Department of Revenue have had conversations about it.
Okay. Is there anybody here from the Department of Revenue to give their stance on that, or is that the best that we have?
I see someone here, and we'll get them up in just a second.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the committee? Representative Rogers. If not, if you might stand aside, I see someone with some friends from the Department of Revenue.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Mac Chandler from the Department of Revenue. First, let me say we have no problem at all with public safety and what they do. In fact, we appreciate it. This, for us, is a budget issue because we get, of the $2.6 million, we have $960,000 that we use for administration purposes at the department, fund some of the alcohol and tobacco agents, same sort of setup that public safety does in terms of the $2.6 million, we get $960,000 of that. And if that's not any excess of that, if it's not used, goes back to the Treasury. And Douglas Hooper with me is probably the most knowledgeable person at the department about the program and can answer questions that you may have. But again, for us, it's just a budget issue.
All right. Questions? Mr. Hawkins.
Just to make sure I understand, does that mean that you support this?
No, if everything goes to public safety, then we lose the funding that we get to fund some other aspects of the department, as well as this administration of this project.
Okay. Thanks.
If I might ask, Mike, again, could you tell me exactly how much was the bottom line of what y'all will lose that goes into your DOR program?
$960,000 annually. And we had, I will say, we had, it's probably been 8 or 9 months ago, we had a meeting at the department. Colonel McDonald came out, some other folks from public safety, Commissioner Virginity, and other members of our team, and we're both kind of on the same page. You know, from a budget standpoint, we're both hurting, trying to fund the process and services we have in place, so it's just, losing the funding would be a tough pill to swallow for us.
I might ask, has there been any discussions with OPB?
That I don't know.
Right. Let's see, Commissioner, excuse me, Representative Hitchens.
But what you're saying with the money is that essentially you're using unified carrier money to support other programs.
Well, we're using it for what it's designed to do, but at the same time, some of the positions in that are funded by UCR, so those people have other duties as well.
But you're using to fund the tobacco program too. You know what you just said.
Well, it's motor fuel. Yeah. You want to explain that?
I'm sorry, I want to call you Commissioner too. Our motor fuel unit uses these funds in their enforcement process when they do fuel dye testing, and they'll also enforce the UCRA if they have the motor carrier pulled over, and that's part of their inspection process, and will issue citations at the time if they're not in compliance.
All right. Mr. Alcom.
Thanks, Chairman Powell. I'm not sure who can answer this in terms of the math. I understand that you'll lose $960,000. What will be the cost savings if it's shifted over to the Department of Public Safety? Is it more than $960,000 or equal to $960,000?
It's my understanding that Department of Public Safety feels they can do it at 10%, which is about 270, as opposed to the savings around 700. Is that correct? Is my math right on that?
I think what we're talking about is shifting this over to the DPS. Money goes with it, and over its revenue, that in that administrative cost of that the URL administration, that DOR has been using that in their general budget. It's been funding other areas over there. Correct?
To some extent, that's true. I don't have a firm number for you.
Bottom line, we're looking at $960,000 effect on DOR's budget if the total amount leaves and goes to public safety. Right. Questions? Representative Hitchens.
I think most of the people in the room know that I was the Commissioner of Public Safety at the time this occurred. And when the Department of Motor Vehicle Safety imploded, the Motor Carrier Compliance Division came to us. And we were unaware for some time that this money was even out there. And when I became aware of it, I approached the Commissioner of Revenue. And, they were keeping all the money at that time. And it took us about 6 months to reach an agreement where we got the 2/3 to actually fund what we were supposed to do. And I never ever was able to find out how much the other money that was kept. And I talked to some of the accountants today, and I don't think that was the case until just a few minutes ago.
All right. Do we have any? No, excuse me. Do we have any other questions from any of the committee members? All right. Thank you, Mac. And as a side note for everybody of the committee, if they don't know Mac Chandler or the gentleman to his right, Mr. Douglas Hooper, you need to get to know him, because both of these guys have a full well of knowledge of the Department of Revenue, even though I almost didn't recognize Doug since he shaved his mustache. Now, do we have anyone else here who wishes to testify or to comment on this proposed legislation? All right. Well, at this time, the chair will reluctantly open this up for a motion. What's the will of the committee? We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. We have a second. Further discussion. As a note to the committee and to Department of Revenue, what I would suggest, we're going to go ahead and take action on this bill, and if it's the will of the committee, to forward it on. But what I would say is I think that y'all need to get in touch with the budget office. I think y'all also need to get in touch with the appropriations committee to see what can be done about a phase out of these funds, or whatever it's going to do, the effect it's going to have on your agents, because that's also a very important part of our. Do we have any other comments by the committee members? If not, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. We have one nay. The ayes clearly have it. Thank y'all.
Thank you,
Representative. Now, Representative, what I would advise you to do is before you go appearing in front of the Rules Committee, you get with DPS and Revenue and go down to the Appropriations Office and see Chairman England, because there may be a lot of questions in the Rules Committee about this. I don't particularly have a problem with the bill being perfected, but there are other ancillary questions about this, the funding method. Is going to probably bring up some issues in the Rules Committee.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, last week we heard testimony on House Bill 35 by Representative Battles. Subcommittee was formed after about 3 hours, almost 3 hours of testimony. And I think that this proves that my philosophy about open dialogue and debate goes a long way. This proposition has changed multiple times, and I think probably for the better. We have a substitute that came out of the subcommittee earlier today, and at this time I'm going to turn this over to Representative Battles to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. We'll be going off of LC 352890S, House Bill 35. The substitute has to do with the basic, and that is of school boards being allowed to select someone to be their resource officer or their security officer within their school with certain provisions. And the second page of that, it talks about that no local school board shall approve personnel to possess a firearm as provided in the section unless it's provided under 4 different provisions. And that is that they have sufficient training of that approved person prior to the authorization of that person carrying a firearm, and it gets specific enough, which was one of the desires of the committee, that that we had some specification of some things that we wanted them to be proficient in. Of course, that was marksmanship, and also training in judgment, pistol shooting. This would be determined in this training by the school board and whatever agency that they deem necessary to come in. That is an accredited agency that would come in and actually do the training. This would also help to curb some of the expense that if we tried to go through the state mandate. And there's also a tremendous amount of training that's in that normally through the state that would not pertain to them, such as defensive driving. So there is a curriculum that's specific for these individuals who would be in the school. They also would have to be the school board would have to list the type of firearms and ammunition, and even to the number of rounds that they would be allowed to carry. Also, in this, there would be the exclusion from any approval of any personnel who has been employed and has a history and indicates any type of mental and emotional instabilities. Number 4, mandate method of securing a firearm. This would be a concealed weapon. If it was the school board so desired the individual to carry the weapon, they would have it on their person, but it would be concealed. Also, and if the school board desires for that not to be the case, then the other securing mechanism would be a box, a lock box, that only that security person could be able to access. As to the elimination of allowing people to bring firearms in, It gets in also in 4. It says that it was be in a holster. Cannot be in a purse, a briefcase, a bag, or any similar other that's accessible to anyone that was there, especially children. Any person that's selected to possess and carry a firearm in the school shall have a valid weapon carrier's license. This is the same thing that we had in the original bill. They would have to go through that same process of going to the probate judge's office, applying for that, the background check, and then receiving their permit to carry. That is in the C section. In the D, the selection of approved personnel to possess and carry a firearm on school property shall be done in a volunteer basis. If you'll remember, in the original bill, it said administrators only. What the committee has, through our work, we have found that there might be many more appropriate people that are within the school other than just an administrator. Many of our schools, especially elementary schools and their administration, there are not that they're not proficient, but there are some that have not had the advantage of maybe growing up, going hunting and using a firearm. And so there may be some others that's in the school that could be designated and then have to go through all the things I've just mentioned, and that is the background checks, the training, etc. And they would be designated to be that security person. No person that is on a volunteer basis. That means that, and this was another factor that we wanted to take care of, is we want to make sure that if there's an administrator that just has, a grudge against one of his employees, he decides that he's going to appoint this person to be that designee for security, and that designee says, no, I'm not going to do it, and then they're dismissed because of that. We've taken care of that in this bill. They cannot be dismissed because they refuse to be that security person. So no employee shall be terminated and otherwise retaliated against for refusing to carry a firearm. Again, this is local board control. If there's anything that I heard from the very first time we was in here, is we want the local board to make the decision. And this is the local boards of education shall be responsible not only in the cost of the training, and with us being able to provide training that may be much less expensive, that might not be an issue as much for some systems. But also, it gives an opportunity if there are those who might apply for grants. There might be those that want to give to the school system money that could be used for the training and for the equipment, the actual guns that they would be carrying. So the funding mechanism has changed just a little bit, not drastically, but it has changed. And then the documents and meeting pertaining to personnel approved to carry the firearms in school shall be considered employees of public safety security records. What this simply means is that we do not want everyone in that school and anyone that might be on the outside to know who's carrying this weapon and who has access to it. And this is the reason, is that once that has been I guess breached and that individual might be identified, it would be like getting on an airplane going to Paris, and the first thing that the stewardess does says, oh, if you'll look 3 seats back, there's your sky marshal, and if you are thinking about hijacking the plane, you might want to take him out first. So we wanted to provide some security for that individual, so that would not be open to public record. and that would give some security not only to those that might think about coming in, but also that those that's on the inside, with the concern some had, well, if they knew that he had a weapon, maybe there would be some kids that would be trying to take that weapon away from him. So we want to be as careful not to put that person in harm's way. The last section was the last section that was dealt with, and I appreciate Representative Atwood, and what he came up with was, I think, great. The last section of it says this code section shall not be constituted to require and otherwise mandate that any local school board or school administration adopted the implement practice or program for the approval of a person of carrying or possessing and carrying a firearm on the school property, nor shall this code section create any liability for adopting or declining to adopt such practice. And what this simply does is it says that if a school system opts out, well, they never opt in. They have the right to do this, but if they decide they do not want to participate, and let's say the worst case scenario, something happens within that school, and someone comes back and they say, oh, yeah, if you had just followed through and you had done what this piece of legislation allowed you to do, maybe we would have been able to avoid this. This was never mandatory. It's not mandatory now, and it's not in this piece of legislation. It does not make it mandatory. So there would be, not in the case of opting out of this, would there be any liability consequences. Now, that does not relieve school systems for any other liability issues, but in this particular case, just opting out of this, there would not be open to a liability issue. And I'll be happy to answer any questions, and at the proper time, I'd ask for favorable consent of the House Bill 35.
Thank you, Mr. Battle. On number G, the latest change that we made in the liability, I think you're exactly right. And if anybody has a concern, while this doesn't mandate, what it also does, it does not relieve school boards for gross negligence. So that's the safety part of that. All right, Mr. Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Battles, I appreciate the hard work that you and the subcommittee have done on this bill. I think it's come very far from where we were last week. We just got copies of it before the meeting started, so I apologize for not being able to discuss some of these issues with you in advance. I'd like to start at lines 36 and 37. That states, and I understand the intent, and I agree with it, which is to keep weapons out of those who may be mentally unstable. I'm concerned, though, that this language may be a bit overbroad. As it reads now, it states the exclusion from approval of any personnel who has had an employment or other history indicating any type of mental or emotional instability. I don't know if that's overbroad and would get just about everybody. I don't know if everybody's had some type of emotional instability in their life. So
I'm not admitting to that.
Neither am I, but in a candid moment, my wife watches The Bachelor, and if anybody watches that, they have a lot of emotional instability on that show. But I digress. So with that, I may commend to you or to the committee or to Legislative Council that we try to tighten that up in a way that satisfies what we're trying to do, but isn't too broad in terms of the net that it may cast in terms of excluding people who may be covered by that. The second issue is in lines 44 to 46 with respect to the criminal history background check. It doesn't then say what happens after we learn that, so I understand the intent, which is to make sure that nobody's committing crimes over the course of the year. I might suggest a friendly amendment to something along the lines of anyone with a criminal record shall not be eligible to carry a firearm under this section, so that if there's something that comes up indicating a crime is committed, that they would be excluded, because that's not explicitly stated right now. The other issue might be if we want to limit this to certain crimes. I don't know if we want to exclude it to all crimes or certain crimes, but just something for consideration in that regard. And then the final, less a question and more a point, is on the confidentiality. I very much appreciate your explanation on that with respect to security, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But this particularly highlights the complexity of this issue, because as a parent of a public school student, part of me would want to know who's in the school with my child and armed, and I think that there would probably be a lot of parents around the state who would want to know this information. It's certainly one of those issues that we'll have to balance and think of what's more important, the security aspect or the transparency aspect. But I think we may have divisions of opinion about what's more important. And finally, what I'll say, I think the greatest virtue of this bill is really the deterrence aspect of it. If it were to be passed by us and a school board, even if no one is armed in any school, just the possibility that they may be, it could have the desired impact of having a deterrence effect of anybody going into our school. So for that reason, I want to thank you for your hard work on this.
Thank you. Just in response, if I might, Mr. Chairman, on line 44 and talking about the possession of firearms in schools, talking about the valid license, the process that many of us have gone through in receiving our license. We first went to the probate judge's office, applied for the license, then we were fingerprinted and a background check to determine whether or not we had a clean record or a dirty record. And then based on that, then we were issued that permit. All of that is part of the requirements. You must have a carrier's permit to even be able to participate in this. And so we're depending on local law enforcement or probate judge's office, especially in doing those background checks, in order to ensure that we have a history of any violations they might have in the past. I don't know if this speaks exactly to your concern there, but that's my response to that particular section.
Any other questions, Mr. Holcomb?
Actually, I have one. Going back to the issue of the mental stability issue, do you know the process by which school boards or schools get that information? Is it part of the screening process for administrators and teachers? Do they have to say that in an employment application? So I'm curious as to how they would have that information available to them.
Again, I want to go back to, in trying to answer this, I go back to the point that was made by several, and especially our chairman, was the fact that we're giving the local school boards the authority to make a decision. And we've put this in here that creates enough of liability on their part so that they have to, I would believe under this, that they would have to evaluate in whatever means necessary to ensure that they had someone that was stable, that was not mentally incompetent to take care of this role. So again, it's the local control, and we're saying to them that they have to, in this process, make sure that this person is mentally capable, and then they become, that liability becomes more of a pressing issue to them than anyone. So it is not that this is, you have to go to a psychiatrist. I'm not sure what the local systems actually do right now. I can't answer that question, but the intent has been, and it has shifted so that it gives more of that control to that local school board, and the intensity of the training and the background checks and the proficiency and all those areas that we've talked about, that just be one more that I think that they would have to take a really hard look at, because that right now is what's probably being talked about in the news media more than anything is mental illness. So again, that's putting that responsibility on that local school board, and that really was what the intent was.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Battle. You've done a lot of work on this bill. It's almost like a new bill. I just have a few questions. The very first one would be number 27 to 33, page 2.
Mm-hmm.
It addresses training.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I understand that this person will be called now designated school personnel, and you have sufficient training of approved personnel, but in this section, it does not describe how much training, what is sufficient training, is there any certification after they go through this training? There's no, it just say minimum. So what constitutes minimum? Is there a standard SOP or something that say now you have enough training that you can go into the schools and carry this weapon?
Right. First of all, the training would have to be done by a training officer. That could be on the local level from the sheriff's department. This training does specifically point out that there are some things that they must do, and that is, of course, in recognition of a target, marksmanship, and actually in firing the weapon itself. It does, again, point back to the local school board that they're taking a tremendous amount of responsibility. If they say, yes, we're going to do this, then again, they're taking on a tremendous amount of responsibility. And and I realize that, and I'm sure they do too. And one of the things that they're going to have to make sure of is that they have had as much training as possible. I would hope that they would avail themselves, in the case of the county that I live in, we have a certified, with the sheriff's department, we have a certified officer, training officer, and would hope that that the school system would take advantage of that, and the sheriff's department would work with them and do it very inexpensively, if not free. But again, that would be the school board. They're going to have to make the decision on how they do it, and they will, if they have to go to full-fledged training course, they're going to have to pay for it. There's any number of ways that the school system can pay for it, or individuals can come out of pocket, and I can't imagine anybody wanting to do that. But if there was some other means of raising the money, they might be able to come up with the funds. But the training itself, again, is going through the local school board and giving them the right to make the choice, but living with the results of their choice. And so I can't imagine any school board that would take this lightly. Adding one other point to it is that you got, in some school systems, they will have campus police. And we do in our county school system, but we house too few officers and cannot afford to hire anymore. So there are certified campus police, and they're located basically in their high schools. But our elementary schools are where we have no coverage whatsoever. So we do know, and the school board knows, the level of training that it requires for them, and I'm sure that they will respond appropriately to make sure those that's in the other schools to have what they need to do their job.
All right, thank you. Further questions, Mr. Chairman?
Go right ahead.
Line 49
Okay.
states that no employee shall be terminated or otherwise retaliated against for refusing to possess or carry a firearm. Now, I know I brought that up to you last week,
Yes.
but I brought that up because at that time you were requiring administrators.
Right.
So I don't think we need that anymore, but it's just my opinion.
Well, it didn't hurt anything to repeat that. In that, it just says that we are not putting them under undue stress, that no person shall be required to possess. Again, I think the intent of it was that no one would feel jeopardized by their job if they did not carry a weapon, and wanted to re-emphasize that if you're asked to carry and you say no, that they cannot terminate you or they cannot harass you because of that.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I have one final question.
Yes, ma'am.
And it is line 61, page 3. We're talking about liability. That's
Yes.
one of the
Mm-hmm.
very important issues here. And I just need some clarification on the liability part of it. We have this designated person that's going to be hired by the school system. They will be an employee of the school system, correct?
Yes,
They'll be on their payroll.
they will be.
So is that person subject to their own, the insurances that the school system, as far as liability for carrying a firearm, or because if they opt in or opt out, they have to be somebody has to pay this insurance in case this officer or designated personnel get hurt.
Exactly.
So is the school system liable for that insurance, which I know will be more than any regular employee insurance, I would think, because of the nature of the job? Or is that personnel responsible for their own?
Again, I keep going back to the local school board, and I would say that this would be the responsibility of a school system to have that coverage, that liability coverage, for the obvious reason. They would want to have the coverage and not leaving it up to an individual to do that. That would be more of a contract than it would be to an employee. The second thing is with the liability insurance is that this could come under an umbrella policy that they have, maybe with some resource officers they already have. They have that's covering all of their campus police. Many school systems, and I won't say that they're all, but many school systems already have some law enforcement in their system. And again, without having to talk with them, I would imagine, be almost certain that every one of them have liability insurance. And so they would have to approach their company that covers that liability for these additional individuals who would come into the school. But it would be the responsibility of that school system.
Thank you.
Representative Atwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, Mr. Chairman, let me apologize to you for being roadkill on the information superhighway and this phone going off. I've tried to silence it as best I could. Representative Battle, just one question of clarification for the committee. There is nothing apart and above from the voluntary nature of a person having to carry a firearm. There is nothing that would prevent a school system from being more restrictive in their training, more restrictive in their qualifications, that sort of thing. Isn't that correct?
We've only given the minimum, and if they decide they want it the maximum, and they want to go and send someone down to kind of down below Macon for 11 weeks, then that would be up to the school board.
Thank you, sir.
Is that it?
Yes, sir.
Questions from the committee? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Battles, one quick question, just clarification more for me, I guess, than anything else. I see it says local Board of Education. Will this include private schools?
It does not. It does not specify we're speaking to the public school system. The determination of whether or not this would have coverage on private schools is not in the bill. And I think the only way that that most people would feel comfortable that it covers the private schools is that if it was actually codified into legislation, I would think. Again, that would be for the interpretation. We have counsel here that I'm sure that we've picked on her a great deal, whether or not that would include private schools. This is not a school issue. This is actually an issue of law. So I would have to defer to counsel on whether or not that would cover private schools.
Questions? Any questions from the committee? I'd like to make a statement to answer some of these questions that have been asked. First, let me start with the last question, and that was about private schools. Private schools already, they can do as they want to do. They're not the public schools. So if they want to allow this, then they can do it. They can do it right now. Secondly, the way the subcommittee, the questions that were brought up. Let me start with number 1 on line 27 through 32. Ladies and gentlemen, these were blueprints of criteria to be considered by the school board. If a school board wants to enter into this, then they have to take these criteria into consideration. These are just basic criteria. Number C, this was basically saying that just because you have a license permit to carry, that the school board would have an obligation to do periodic checks, annually at the least, to be sure that that person or those persons have not had a conviction or whatever in between times. Basically, for them to do due diligence with these people. Basically, I think the cost was added into there. The school board can pay for it. They can work out an agreement with the persons that may choose to participate in this, or if there are groups, whether it's Georgia Carry or NRA or the local sheriff's department or whoever it may be, if they wish to enter into an agreement with them, then they can do so. Quite frankly, this bill was designed for the school systems. And we understand, and I think the subcommittee understood, as this committee does, that we're breaking a little bit of new ground here, given some of the effects that we have seen in our society as of late. For those people who do believe in the Second Amendment right, this is a step forward in that. And that being said, at this time, if there's no questions from the committee, we had plenty of hearing last week, but out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to open up the floor. Do we have anyone who wishes to address this that didn't address it last week? If you addressed it last week and you've got some new ground you want to plow, then come forward. But don't be replowing old ground, because if you've got something you want to add.
I want to ask some questions. Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I have some questions. With these changes that have taken place, will it now allow a school board to arm as many or all of its employees at their discretion?
Yes.
Okay. With these changes and local control, will it allow the local school board to give the minimum of training that is designated on this bill, which is target shooting, and make sure that they do the background check and the mental health check?
That is correct.
That's the minimum?
There was some other things that it's also target judgment
Okay. Is there anything that would prevent a school board that is basically very in favor of eliminating the concealed carry limit on schools to basically train their entire school? Maybe even get some member of the NRA to go do some target shooting for the entire school and basically have minimal training? Is that what these changes have?
This legislation leaves that up to the discretion of the local school board.
Okay.
They can train everybody in the school if they so wish that's an employee.
Okay.
They can already hire law enforcement if they wish.
Okay. Do we have any data before bringing up all these changes that having additional weapons in the school are actually going to reduce school violence?
We have some evidence that in some cases where schools have been invaded and there was no one there to intervene, we know what the violence was.
Yes, but we've also had some issues where schools have, whoever has brought in weapons into the school, and some people have been hurt as well. Okay, you guys know the position of 1 million moms. I just wanted to bring up these questions because we feel that it opens up an entire can of worms, especially with these changes.
Thank you, ma'am. You would please identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Peggy Marks. I'm just a concerned citizen listening to this today. And these are just questions that occurred to me in listening to the committee meeting today. As far as checking on somebody's mental stability, the records right now for those kinds of things are not computerized. It's going to be very difficult to, by what mechanism will you assure that? To my knowledge, no mechanism exists right now to discover a mental illness about a person if they don't admit it, if they lie about it. Is that not something that should be considered?
Well, I think that, ma'am, we're dealing with a specific proposal. And, and I think back to the tragedy that happened in Connecticut. I think there was no doubt that that this young man probably had a mental condition of some sort. But, I think the proposal is that there's never enough law enforcement officers. Even if there are, they aren't there whenever something's needed. If there had been someone armed at that school, they may not have prevented this tragedy. But at the same time, if someone had been authorized, then maybe they could have prevented some of the tragedy.
I understand the intent of the law. My question is, by what means are you going to assure that the person who's carrying the gun in the school does not have some kind of mental illness? Okay.
The database is searched as part of the handgun permit process.
Okay, I'm sorry. That does answer my question. There is some mechanism for discovering that. But my understanding is the medical records. I'm sorry. And there's one other thing that occurs to me, and that is there are situational mental illnesses that can happen to anybody at any time. So is there any consideration for those kinds of things? Things that are situational and are not clinical, and some tragedy happens to you and you have a mental break. Those are my questions.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else that wishes to speak or to address this committee? Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question was asked about statistics and is this going to guarantee how many lives it's going to save. I would like to offer just one comment. My 4-year-old granddaughter learned a new word a week ago, lockdown. There had been a robbery in our small little community, and the schools immediately went into lockdown. It was not near her school or right next door, but it was an armed robbery. And the fact that a 4-year-old pre-K had to learn about lockdown, no one came to the school because they know we have resource officers in our schools. So we did not have an incident, and I would accredit part of that to the public knowing that we have guards in our school. Thank you.
Very good. Now, do we have any other questions from any of the committee members? If we don't, what is the will of the committee?
Mr. Chairman, do pass.
We have a motion from Representative Atwood.
A second.
Are you intending to make some changes? Let me get this one. We have a second. Now, any member of the committee wishes to speak? Mr. Holcomb.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit a couple of changes to the bill, some friendly amendments, if you will. On line 37, after instability, add as determined by the local school board. And then down on line 46, after the word annually, add to determine whether such person remains qualified to possess a weapons carry permit.
I'm sorry, I missed that. What was the second one? I'm sorry.
On line 46,
Okay.
after the word annually, add to determine whether such person remains qualified to possess a weapons carry permit.
All right. Any others?
No, sir.
Very good. All right, we have an amendment to the substitute. Sort of a motion.
It's on line 37.
Would you repeat that?
I'd be happy to. Line 37, after instability, add as determined by the local school board.
Okay.
We accept those as amended.
No problem with that.
Yes. We're working on the LC 2890S.
Thank you.
Line 37, strike and add as determined by the local school board. All right. Make a motion to accept. All right, we have a motion, we have a second to accept the language. We have a second. All in favor of this language, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Let's go back to the proper posture of the bill now. I think that it would be in order to do this as a committee substitute. All right. Any other questions from the committee? Any other proposals or proposed amendments? All right. If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Then let's do a show of hands then. Everybody can be on record. All in favor, raise your right hand. All right. All opposed? And the ayes have it. Representative Battles, your bill is now in the Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the committee.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, if we could, We'll take just a brief second for the committee. I see there's a couple of folks who haven't been to the previous meetings. I see some folks from from GEMA, and I think I see one from Post over there. Would y'all like to get up and introduce yourselves to the committee, because the committee may have need to get to know y'all. And if you want to. You're welcome.
Thank you for your question and your amendments. I appreciate it.
All right, committee. Ken, would y'all like to come over here and introduce yourself before this committee gets away? Donna?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ken Vance. I'm the director of executive director of Peace Officer Standards and Training in Georgia. And anytime we can help, there are only 23 of us, but anytime we can help with the law enforcement issue that you have, I know Mr. Allen isn't bashful about calling, and he's still Colonel to me. Colonel Hitchens isn't bashful about calling, and he served on our board for a long number of years. So he could probably answer most of the questions himself, but we'd be honored to assist you in anything that we can.
Thank you, Ken. Good to have you here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Donna Burns with Georgia Emergency Management Agency. We've been a little busy up in northwest Georgia, but anything we can do to help you all, we'd be glad to do that. And my colleague, Gary Kelly.
Gary Kelly, one of the deputy directors with GEMA Homeland Security here, representing Director English. And thank you very much. And if there's anything we can do for you, any questions you may have, feel free to get in touch with us anytime. Thank you.
Thank y'all for taking time to stop by today.
No, sir.
And if y'all could leave your contact information with Taylor, committee secretary. That way any of the members that don't have it, they can get your numbers. Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting is adjourned.